I think I'm ready to get started. Okay, Buttercup, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hello, hello. Welcome to Comics U Course 2. Yes, exactly. We did it. So today we're going to be talking about web comics to print. A lot of people make comics on the web because it is easy, it's accessible, you get to make all the decisions, it's great. And then sometimes you want to move over to print and make some other money, maybe some real cash money even. So today we're going to be talking with Buttercup, who is already here. You can kind of see them in the corner over there. So Buttercup works on the book which is right here. If you do not have a copy of the book and you're interested in purchasing it, you can get it from here, Betty's Books. There's some at the front, and you can probably ask Alex where the others are. If you did a pop quiz today, you know you can use those points, those Betty's Bucks, to buy a copy of the book. So think about that. So yes, we're gonna be talking to Buttercup. They did this book, It was a webcomic first, and then it was made into a print book from Radiator Comics. And Buttercup is going to walk us through making that transition, why they do this work, and then we're gonna do the same as last time, have a Q&A. So, think of some questions as they're presenting, and we can ask them afterwards. Okay, sound good? All right, Buttercup, you are free to go.
Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to Webcomics to Print. How one person did it one time so far. So, who am I and why am I here? Steen's already introduced me, but repetition helps memory commitment. So, hey, hi, I'm Buttercup, an ADHD, non-binary, queer, Afro-Indigenous, multidisciplinary visual artist and the cartoonist behind the Eisner Award-nominated graphic novel Volume 1, a black magical girl comic and esoteric text for the internet age. Between 2016 and 2020, I wrote, drew, and published online 6 chapters and 2 pieces of supplementary material that would eventually become Volume 1. I'm continuing to update the story, which has 8 planned volumes, a sequel one-shot I've already thumbnailed, and a tie-in video game I'm not good enough at coding or time management to start work on. The print edition of the book was published in September 2024 by Radiator Comics and was co-edited by Jamila Rouser and Steen Stewart. Hold for applause. What we have here is some of the webcomic versions of the pages that were printed initially in between 2016 and 2018. And you can see that there's a bit of variety difference between them. And then we've got the print version of these pages that were edited specifically for print. So the first page, if I go back to it, you see that we did a complete redraw. For the second one, I did some color remapping and added some additional effects and shadows. And then for the third one, because the scene takes place at nighttime, we changed the background and did some other stuff. So that's I just want everyone to be secure in the idea that if you decide to make a webcomic and then want to take it to print, it doesn't have to be perfect when it's online, because the print version can go through many iterations before it arrives at what people will be holding in their hands. So, webcomics to print, specifically your webcomic. We're here mainly to talk about printing your webcomic. So first off, why do it? In my opinion, there are 2 big reasons. Reason number 1, broader audience base. If you're entrenched in the webcomic/webtoon space, you might be okay with your comic being web exclusive, but you might also have seen other cartoonists release a print edition of their story. The print side of the industry has a much more expansive interest engine with IRL shops, cons, expos, fests, book signings, panel discussions, etc. So, summoning your webcomic into Meet Space can help with amplifying your potential audience base. Physical books have an inbuilt system for interest maintenance and rejuvenation. Print comics occasionally get reprints and fresh editions with flashy new covers, omnibuses, and movie adaptation release reissues. Unless you make a big to-do about your webcomic migrating to a different platform, being up for an award, or getting adapted into another medium, there aren't always clear ways outside of viral marketing and word of mouth to generate more viewership. Basically, success in the book world is self-perpetuating. Print is a big gamble to stake your career on, but it's potentially an informed business risk. This can also be true online, but offline it tends to be a little less unhinged and random. If your webcomic goes viral, it may not be because a lot of people are reading it for the story, but because a flash mob of edgelords hyperfixated on a specific page and posted it to Reddit. And all press is good press, but mainstream press involves less willful decontextualization in my experience. Now, to be fair, some of the like real press around when it was released mispronounced or misspelled Eugene's name, misrepresented some of the things that happened in the book. So like you can still get misrepresentation, but it's not intentional decontextualization. Reason number 2, can I pet that dog? Some cartoonists see the predictable dopamine hit and social engagement of likes/comments as a practical way to stay routinely motivated, me included, but still prefer physical books for the tactile experience, material value, and sentiment they carry. There's nothing quite like the new book smell, and getting to pass something you made around to friends and family can be a real boon to your self-worth. You can gift or loan someone a physical book, but until whatever NFTs were supposed to be actually exist in a non-scammy way, it's not considered a gift to give someone a webcomic link. For chronically offline normies, handing them a book puts it into the exchange economy in a way that incentivizes them to spend time with it and pass it on to other people if/when the subject of the book aligns with their friend's specific interests. Did you notice I didn't mention money? I wouldn't tell people to invest in D&D because of the rising star of actual play, and I wouldn't tell someone to get into fine art because someone made $20 million at Art Basel last year. So I'm not going to tell people to make comics because the Avengers movies regularly break $1 billion in revenue. We all need to make money under late stage capitalism, so monetizing your already extant interest in comics is just a sound survival strategy. But I don't think your primary motivation for printing should be hypothetical profitability. I've got an Eisner nomination and still live below the poverty line as an example of how well that can go. Now, it's a different story if you pitch an original story to an indie publisher and they offer you a contract with an advance, or you submit a one-shot to a webcomic hosting site and they help set you up with a team to make sure you make your weekly deadlines. And we can have that conversation and talk about the benefits of hiring an agent some other time. In fact, I think last week Amanda Meadows talked a little bit about that. And I think that it is a worthwhile conversation to have about like entering the webcomics industry from a industry-backed angle. But for now, let's assume your webcomic impulses come from a place of intrinsic motivation and passion about your story and/or the medium, and operates primarily as a hobby rather than a career prospect, because that's what I'm familiar with. Comics and me, my history with comics and why you should listen to me. Every reader has their own unique experience with comics, and I want to share some of mine. Now, this is just a little bit, it's going to take up a lot of time, but it's a little bit of just like an unhinged, like, hey, I like comics. Share with me my love of comics, just to show you my background. So, Western comics, first off. Spider-Man/Venom, age 6. My uncle gave me a copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 374, written by David Michelin and drawn by Mike Bagley in 1993. I'm pretty sure that this was in 1994, so a year after the book came out, when the Fox Kids Spider-Man TV show started airing. And I told my uncle that I really liked it, and he was like, hey, I've got some like back issues of Spider-Man if you want. And I was like, really? And saw the cover for this, and it locked in my mind. So this is my first encounter with Spider-Man in comics form. X-Force, number 30, age 7. This image of Shatterstar by Tony Daniel et al. Lived rent-free in my head for most of my childhood. I couldn't and still can't tell you why. I have such a huge crush on Shatterstar. I don't know how to explain it. But I remembered having this book, but the version of it that I had, and I think I might have also gotten it from my uncle, didn't have the cover on it. And the cover art was by a different artist. So when I went back to like try and find scans of this comic to share today, I like had so much trouble. I had to read through like issue after issue after issue of X-Force in order to find this again. But like, look at that pose, look at that dynamism. Like I tried to capture this image throughout all of my like elementary through high school era, just trying to get that movement. I love the look of it. Okay, Sonic the Hedgehog, age 9. My best friend had a collection of all of Archie Comics' Sonic the Hedgehog to date. Actually, he might have been missing 2 issues. And I would read them during sleepovers. This is Sonic Super Special #1, Sonic versus Knuckles Battle Royale, and the cover of it was done by Patrick Spaziente, who would go on to do the artwork for some of Marvel's What If comics later on. I don't know if you've noticed a trend so far, but Silver Surfer from the 1987 like massive run, number 125 for age 9, Silver Surfer versus the Hulk should have been one of the more iconic feuds in comics history based on this run alone. Alas, I was the only person I knew who remembered this into adulthood. This was a story about the Hulk sort of beginning to fuse with Banner's personality, and so his like raising intellect was causing him to feel really depressed. And this was like maybe the first instance of depression that I remember interacting with in comics form. And Silver Surfer's autistic ass did not understand what was going on, and so like kept trying to be like, "Feel better, dude." And then Hulk would be like, "No, I'm angry, I'm sad," and that's why they ended up fighting. Archangels, the Saga, age 10. My grandma bought me issues of this evangelical propaganda comic, and my favorite issue was drawn by Andy Park, who went on to become the lead concept artist for the MCU. Now, the earlier issues of this comic like were done in the sort of like Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane sort of like sketchy style, or like pin sketchy style, and like I wasn't really vibing with it. But I thought it felt kind of ugly to look at. I didn't enjoy it personally. But then after issue 6 came out and Andy Park did the cover and the entire interior, I was like, what is this? Like, I stopped reading the comic after that point. I was just like hyper fixated on how good the art was and like tried to replicate it over and over and over again. Uncanny X-Men number 389, age 12. Cecilia Reyes' substance abuse arc in Uncanny X-Men changed my brain chemistry. It changed again when they both whitewashed her and made her a villain in the New Mutants movie. Spoiler for New Mutants. But this specific run of Uncanny X-Men just like locked in my brain for some reason. It was a really interesting story arc, and the B or C plot was about Cecilia Reyes being addicted to this what do you call it? Performance enhancing drug called rave. But it also has a bunch of the iconic imagery that we would eventually have in the movies of like flashing back to Charles's time in college with Moira Taggart and the war. And also it established Wolverine and Rogue's relationship and their antagonism against Mystique in a really interesting way. Definitely recommend going back and rereading this run of comics. Okay, now manga. Angelic Layer, age 12. I loved Pokemon, but found it really alienating that the entire story took place in a world where Pokemon are just animals. So when I found a series that was about little robots, I geeked. I really loved this comic. It was by Clamp. I also was a big fan of their other Pokemon-like Cardcaptor Sakura. But this one like was one of those things that I just sat on the floor of Borders books and just like read Tankobon after Tankobon of in middle school. And then Blade of the Immortal, age 12. At some point in middle school, someone lent me this book, and from an artistic influence standpoint for me, there was before Blade of the Immortal and after Blade of the Immortal. I'm sorry, if this seems like it's not about webcomics, trust me, all of this is built into something. But Blade of the Immortal is just one of those like really rich, like pencil drawn with some pages that are done in ink, like really elaborate fight scenes and panels. The story is really gruesome and difficult, but like a lot of the imagery in it just like locked into my head. And this story became the basis for From Software and Hidetaka Miyazaki's Game Award winning video game Sekiro. So like if y'all haven't gone back and read this, definitely recommend it. And that led to me finding out about Naruto. Masashi Kishimoto's early art and panel composition was some of the most dynamic yet understated work I had ever seen, and I basically just did Naruto fan art for all of high school. I would be embarrassed to show you, but if you feel like doing some independent research, my DeviantArt is still up. And then Nana, age 15. One of my best friends in high school loaned me her entire collection of imported Japanese Nana tankobon, and I couldn't read them, but I love the size of the books. And I know you can't see me very well, but you can see that is, you may not be able to see, but is like tankobon sized, and like having this collection in my hand and being able to just like put it in my pocket and walk to school was like a thing that just like stuck in my brain again. And so when I was bringing to print, like I knew already that this is the size that I wanted the book to be. And now we get to my comics. So Legends of Aureus, age 16. I attempted to turn the science fantasy novel I was writing in my morning journal for English class into a comic, but didn't have any mentors to teach me Photoshop, comics grammar, or color theory. So what you get is this nightmarish, like I tried to use the fill tool to do all this stuff. And I was using like a bootleg version of Photoshop that ran really poorly on the computer that I was using. So like this was my first foray into comics, and I quickly was like, I don't think I'm cut out for this. But then Nine's Lives, age 16, 9 months before the end of sophomore year, I got recruited by my school newspaper to do a monthly humor cartoon, and the best thing I could come up with was a cat dying 9 different times. But the structure of this comic, I like look back at it and I'm like, teenage me was already doing the sort of stuff that I do with my stories today, which is like, it's a story about a cat named Nine, and each like installment, you're finding out about one of the 9 times that he dies. And the comic itself is structured as a 9-panel, is in a 9-panel structure. And like, I really like that sort of like recursive, make it make sense kind of thing. But like, meanwhile, my idea of like place and placement, also just like panel structuring, is not the best. There was much to be desired. But the same sort of magical realism and anime vibes are things that persist in my art to this day. Okay, now we get to age 28. After an almost 10-year hiatus from drawing seriously, I started work on my now Eisner Award nominated webcomic which is still ongoing and is the closest thing I have to a job. Oh, and then we've got a little bit of a dip here. In 2020, age 31, I got a potentially life-changing gig working for one of the big-name comics publishers doing concept, covers, layout, lines, color, lettering, and graphic design for a new series. Then the pandemic struck. Later, the project went forward without me. Sad to say, it's out there in the world. It might even be in this comic shop, but I can't talk about it. And then there's Real Realm, which I did with famed comic writer Jamila Rouser, who did Wash Day Diaries with Robin Smith. It is, in my opinion, one of the best novels ever written, period. So if you haven't read that yet, please pick it up. But together we did Real Realm. After reading comics writer Jamila Rouser contacted me to work on a mini comic for Radiator Comics, Spiny Orb Weaver imprint. At the time, I could feel this was my actual big break. Real Realm is a story about 4 gods who are all sisters who are trying to rehabilitate their public image by starring in a reality TV show, and it goes less well than they could have anticipated. But it's a mini comic. I'm not sure where it's available right now, but I can inquire if anybody ends up being curious. You can contact me on social media to see if I can get you a copy. And now the updated version of Volume 1, age 36. This is in the past year or so. I updated the art for the early chapters that were 8 years old at this point, and released this mix of all of my influences and previous fixations. A tonkable in size, science fantasy, esoteric text, and a culmination of everything I like about comics in one tiny package. Oh my God, it's so teensy, teeny tiny, and it's packed full of stuff. Now, I have a confession to make. I have to self-report. I'm not actually a comics girly. Despite the aforementioned credentials, I actually enjoy animation, film, literary fiction, fine art, music, and graphic design more than I like comics. I'm so sorry to all of you comics primaries out there. Webcomics weren't even my thing. I came up long before Webtoon and Tapas popped off, and the only time I spent online with comics was for scanlations of manga, never on forums or archives, so I don't know my history in either mainstream or indie comics quite like academic sequential arts studies folks do. I have a vague awareness of things, had a vague awareness of things like Powerpuff Girls Dojinshi and Lackadaisy when I was on DeviantArt in the aughts, and people recommended me things like Strong Female Protagonist and Homestuck in the teens, but I was absolutely captured by independent cinema and literature during my 20s. So a lot of that was and is alien to me. So you're probably wondering, why make a webcomic? Well, I've got some reasons right here. If you self-publish a webcomic, There is no quality control or grammar police to tell you you're doing it wrong. Dean's already mentioned this. It's true. So it's effectively an extremely low stakes play space. The only folks you have to worry about are other people in the community. And if you spend 30 seconds browsing the recent uploads on any webcomics host, you'll quickly see you're buying real estate in a glass housing development. You can make a webcomic about virtually whatever topic you want, but rather than let that overwhelm you, that means that you can just hyperfixate on your special interests. Also, it's free. Webtoon, Tapas, and Comic Fury all allow you to upload for free and advertise your preferred tipping sites. Now, I do want to add the caveat that in descending order here, we've got Webtoon, Tapas, and Comic Fury. Webtoon and Tapas have very rigorous censoring, what do you call it, rules in place because they need to be able to be available on the Apple Store. And so I initially uploaded to Webtoons, but because of depictions of the main character having their period and like dealing with that in just like a very normal way, they were like, sorry, you can't have that up here. So they deleted the entire webcomic. On Tapas, they did something similar, but they left the comic up. They sent me a private message being like, hey, so we're not going to be able to have the comic available on the app, but we'll leave it on the web version of the site because it doesn't adhere to our terms of services. Comic Fury, on the other hand, is a den of debauchery. I don't know if anyone has ever read anything on Comic Fury, but it's mostly a lot of furry stuff, ecchi, fan comics about characters who did not have sex in their the canon versions of the story doing that thing. So the censorship is based next to nothing, but the person who runs the site is very rigorous about like if there are any abuses happening on the site, not allowing that to continue. So I really enjoy Comic Fury because they allow you to upload whatever, but if someone sees something and they're offended by it, they can call it out and it'll also still be taken down. As a neuroatypical marginalized person, it's really difficult for me to navigate the extremely socially demanding animation/film, literary fiction, fine art, music, and graphic design spaces. I kept burning out and burning bridges without understanding why or how when forced to schmooze or attempt to bring people together to work on a project. At some point, making a comic became the only way for me to express myself and exercise my Jackie of all tradesness without activating my own rejection sensitivity issues. Creative problem solving is my full-time hobby. I'm a puzzle maker and a lore nerd, so the human element is literally the least interesting aspect of storytelling for me. It of course factors into almost every facet, but I approach everything from world building to plot to character progression to composition to word choice to color design as logic puzzles that I designed and also need to solve. Started out as a meditation on a series of unfortunate events that happened amongst my various friend groups between 2003 and 2013. I wanted to revisit my memories, re-narrativize. I wanted to revisit my memories over the past decade and, if I could, understand how archetypes and personality impact the predictability of human behavior. Because, I thought, if I can predict how people will behave, I can prevent tragedy in ways that scale. I still think this is true and consider myself a propagandist and my work propaganda, but rather than in service of deceiving people, I have a vested interest in reducing epistemic injustice, which means suffering from events one doesn't have the means to understand or describe. There's plenty of things in the world that are everyday realities for some folks, but that never even cross the minds of others, resulting in privilege and self-sustaining power imbalances. In its current form, is now a meditation on this as a concept, and, based on its reception, a successful one. Now, success. What is it? How do you get it? What do you do with it once you have it? Let's talk about getting published as a prestige destination and why I think you'll benefit from having a more personal definition of what you want and why you want it. Success and failure are contingent on an explicit goal, a particular puzzle. I struggled for years to identify what the actual underlying puzzle was that I wanted to try to solve through my work. Was it personal, social, systemic, or all/none of the above? What puzzle do you want to solve through your comic? If you aspire to make your comic because you love the medium, that's personal. If it's to share with friends, that's social. And if it's to right an injustice in the world, that's systemic. The kinds of people I ended up close to because they could handle my incorrigible awkwardness led me to realize there is an immense amount of injustice in the world. Was born from that reality, so though it has personal and social aspects, the underlying goal I have is systemic. Now, for some of you, I can imagine that success is as simple as looking at the wall in your local comic shop, webtoon front page, or your own bookshelf and feeling that almost divine conviction, I want to make comics, and whatever acting on that vocation looks like is what success is for you. For some of you, I can imagine a rigorous and practical approach to wanting to do everything the right way, through the right channels, telling the best possible stories with the most three-dimensional characters. For others, I can imagine comics existing as a vehicle for spending time with friends, sharing ideas, works in progress, layouts, funny dialogue, and engaging in the joy of research and knowledge sharing. And for a tiny and hilarious group of you, I can imagine making comics as an act of spite and naked competition, wanting to do better, be more well-loved than the cartoonist sitting next to you. Comics just happens to be the milieu where you decided to channel this bottled-up misanthropy. The success condition for my comic is that the material circumstances of the world change. Until then, my work is never done. So no amount of awards, accolades, money, or affirmation constitutes success for me. It may not be the same for you, but before you think about printing your comic, I suggest you find out what's motivating you in the first place. Otherwise, the printing process is just going to be a ton of time and money spent on a thing you'll ask, why did I do that to myself about 10 years from now? Success, practical ways to up your game. Now, with that being said, there are some practical ways to achieve more normative standards of success. A successful comic tends to have compelling writing, skillful artwork, seamless visual grammar. And the material circumstances these can change for you include streamlining your process, making more money, and getting more press. Here's an example, or not an example, but like an exploration of successful writing. I personally spent my 20s in literary circles, reading and writing a ton of contemporary literature and establishing a foundation for what I consider my writing style/voice. Then I researched a bunch of storytelling archetypes and patterns through channels like Overly Sarcastic Podcasts on YouTube and some of the various story circle models for how to craft a compelling narrative. I'm not going to say the names of the people who make those story circles because we don't fuck with those people no more. But spending time contemplating the work that came before you can help you develop the mental muscle for what keeps audiences interested in the story you're telling and keeps them coming back for more. It also helps to listen to and take note of real people in the real world. Some of the most compelling dialogue just sounds realistic. People talk over and past each other, ask each other questions, and then deflect rather than answer. Use shorthand or contracted grammar rather than speaking in full sentences. If your writing feels stilted, it may be because you're taking the rules too seriously rather than thinking about what's reflective of your characters' personalities. Real life is often the best teacher because if you're just basing your comics on other comics. Now I want to talk about successful art, but instead of actually talking about it or even adding anything to the conversation, I'm just going to quote Hayao Miyazaki. He says, "You see, whether you can draw like this or not, being able to think up this kind of design, it depends on whether or not you can say to yourself, oh yeah, girls like this exist in real life. If you don't spend time watching real people, you can't do this because you've never seen it. Some people spend their lives interested only in themselves. Almost all Japanese animation is produced by with hardly any basis taken from observing real people, you know. It's produced by humans who can't stand looking at other humans. And that's why the industry is full of otaku." I just fully stand by this. I think that the best teacher for a person who wants to make comics is to explore the actual world that they inhabit and like see how the people around them interact. The basis for the majority of my comic is based on people who I know, conversations that I had with them about what sort of things they'd like to see in comics, what sort of stories like are part of their everyday that are not publicly available to people. And so if you're the kind of person who admires a comic a lot, and so you're just sort of making a thing that's derivative of that thing, and that person was also just making something that was derivative of something else, there's this recursive sort of, regression to the mean of things that are just not even related to the human experience anymore. It's a generation of, actual generation, like it's generating culture, but it's the kind of culture that's divorced from actual human interaction, and I cannot stand by that. So I'm just going to be like, hell yeah, Miyazaki. Now, successful grammar. There are tons of online and academic resources that teach panel composition. I know that there are some books out there. I've heard people talk about them. I might have even heard, yeah, I've heard people talk about the books that help teach panel structure. Definitely recommend those. And two outstanding examples for me are Super Eye Patch Wolf, the YouTuber's video on Akira Toriyama's paneling in Dragon Ball, and Pause and Select, which is another YouTube channel, video on Yoshitoki Oima's paneling in A Silent Voice. A lot of grammatical rules for film also apply to comics, like the 180 rule. So thinking about how your story exists in virtual space can help minimize readers' confusion about what's happening on the page. Now, this is like a really poor, in my opinion, I wrote it so I can say that, overview of like how to think and talk about comics grammar, like the visual grammar of paneling. But it is a thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about. And so I recommend like just sort of like being like, hey, how do I feel about my relationship to how things are paced in my webcomic, and will that translate well to print? Success. Why care about what's normal? Well, once you've internalized what works for most people, you have a better library to work from for how to more effectively improvise. I'm going to read that again. Bad at improvising, me. Once you've internalized what works for most people, you have a better library of work to work from for how to more effectively improvise. I know that sentence makes sense, but my brain refuses to understand it. Jazz musicians end up becoming steeped in music theory, and rap battlers are students of idioms, platitudes, and dad jokes, because the better you understand how things are interrelated, the more fun you can have highlighting strange coincidences and fun juxtapositions. This can all also give you better tools for how to play the opportunity game. All right, next section, narrativizing luck, a practical guide to preparedness. Unless you're independently wealthy, these are some helpful tips for how to think about moving through the print comic space. Luck, career moves, are basically gambling. In Dungeons & Dragons, dice are used to simulate probabilities, and character statistics are used to simulate weighted probabilities. If you have $1 billion, you basically add +20 to charisma and roll with advantage on any checks that you might make to get your webcomic printed. Now, billionaire you could roll 2 natural ones and critically fail, but there's only a 1 in 400 chance of that happening. None of us will ever be that buff, but we can help ourselves out a little bit. Luck, bend it to your will. Even if your goals are personal or social, there's still no guarantee you'll achieve your standard for success. But by increasing your virtual ability score, you might be able to give yourself a better chance. Play to your strengths. If you're social, be social. If you like drawing, draw. If you like graphic design, layout, branding, and lettering are all important to people. Let's take a look at my stat block and how it affected my experience in comics. All right, so what we've got here is Buttercup's stat block for writing experience, artistic skill, work ethic, panel flow, business sense, and social skills. Now you can see at age 10, I had a 1 in writing. I was growing up in an evangelical household, being homeschooled, but my mom did like to teach us to write things. And so I was like, writing a lot of stuff, but a lot of the stories just kind of resembled the sort of parables that you'd see in the Bible. An artistic skill, I drew all the time. So like I was already up at like level 3 by the time I was 10. I was drawing all kinds of stuff. You guys saw the Photoshop thing from Legends of Aureus. Like that wasn't that bad. You know what I'm saying? I could have worked on my backgrounds a bit, but I'm still around a 3. Work ethic. I have never not been driven. If I say that I'm going to do something, it's going to get done. Even if it takes 20 years, at some point I'm going to get to it. So that is a thing that I'm very confident about. Then panel flow, business sense, those were at 0s at 10 for, I think, obvious reasons. One of them being that I grew up in a Black household and we don't really talk about these things. Like panel flow. We don't talk about panel flow in Black household. Social skills. I was groomed to be a evangelical preacher. And so like, I kind of like maxed out my social skills pretty early on. And there hasn't been a whole lot of growth in that time period. So you can see like by age 20, I developed a lot of writing experience. I had already started working on my first novel by age 20. And so like, that's a place where like I experienced a lot of growth and feel fairly confident. My artistic skill, again, I feel like over the course of that next decade, I figured out what sort of stylistic things I liked. You saw all those comics that I referenced. I really like those art styles, so I've been mimicking and emulating those for a long time. And the work ethic, don't even need to talk about it. Panel flow, I picked it up just from reading comics. I understood how things are supposed to flow to some degree, though I couldn't replicate it. Business sense, still my lowest level, which is what I got Steams for. And then social skills, fully maxed out, level 6 at age 20, have not grown at all. So I know that is my, like, those lower three things are the things that I, do not excel in, and that like I'm going to have to work really hard to get better at. I can imagine being really good at panel flow and business sense by age 40, but it's going to take a lot of dedication. And so I probably shouldn't focus on those things right now in my career. The things that I'm maxed out on are artistic skill. That's the thing that people look at when they're looking at my comics. So if I can get images that I drew in front of people, I know that I can draw them to my work. So this is sort of what I'm talking about when I say narrativizing luck. Play to your strengths. Oftentimes, like people will try to go and schmooze a lot and then burn out and or like not have the social skills to be able to sell themselves. And like what I recommend that you do when you're trying to move from the virtual world of comics to the IRL world of comics is like just show up where you are at, and a lot of other skills will be developed along the way. You can prepare like a meal. Prepare for what you can: costs, quantities, target audience, social interactions, explaining your process, identifying your own weaknesses, and then get help for what you can't. Insider know-how. That obviously y'all are interested in that because you're attending Comics U. Hey, yeah. Areas of weakness, historic precedents, academic resources, things you may have overlooked. Honestly, like this is a long presentation, but if there was like one panel that I'd be like, screenshot this, this is the thing that's going to be the best for you at mitigating the epistemic injustice that you might be experiencing when trying to move through the print comics area. So screenshot this, if you need me to go back, I can. Imagine, use your creativity to shape actual reality. Visualizing the art object. What dimensions, texture, weight. Like I said, like I already knew, actually, let me just show you this. I'm gonna mention it later on in the presentation, but like I printed a sample version of the comic when I just had like 3 chapters out, just to see how it would look and feel in my hands. And it's not entirely dissimilar to the size and texture of the book, how it ended up. I already knew back in 2017 what I wanted the book to be like if it was ever going to go to print. And then just a quick supplement for aphantasic people. If you have trouble visualizing things in your mind, what are some of your favorite books? They don't have to be comics. If you like the feel of the book, write down what you like about it for later. And then there's also just logistical things you need to think about. This is the full cover spread for Volume 1. I knew that I wanted the book to have French flaps, right? I know you can't see me that well, but I wanted the book to have French flaps. I knew that that I was going to have to expand outside of the width and length of the page in order to be able to map everything onto it. And so you kind of got to think about the material reality of the book and look up. I recommend looking up, finding out what dimensions most standard printing takes place using, because that's going to help you to have a better understanding of what your physical book is going to look like. Now, most publishers hire another artist or graphic designer to do the cover work, but like if you got that Jackie of all tradesness going on, then you can also do what I did, which was design my own full cover. Now, how to print? How did we choose? Self-publishing. That was the first route that I was thinking about taking. I even did some sample prints. Oh, that's where this comes in. I did some sample prints early chapters to see how they might be. I used Kablam for these low-cost early samples, but wasn't sure that I wanted to go forward with them. Finding a publisher. By getting in touch with a seasoned publisher, you may encounter someone with personal relationships with printers. We ended up going with Print Ninja for our first edition, but at a recent convention, a printer from China offered us a deal if we want to use them for the second edition. And I'm like seriously considering it. They identified a bunch of issues that I had with the initial print, and I was like, oh, this person like has the chops. I don't remember their name, but it's the same printing company that did The King's Warrior by Hua Hua Zhu. And like this book looks and feels incredible. And I was like, maybe we want to switch it up for the second edition. So this is another thing that you can like take into account is that like additional editions of the book can change stylistically or texturally or just like based on what print or just what printer you decide to go with, even if the texture and weight are the same. So printing my webcomic, what it was like and how I survived. Did you enjoy my brief introduction? That was just an appetizer. Now it's time for the main course. No, just kidding. What I'm going to do here is like talk about the experience that I had with me, Jamila Steens, and Neil Bordeaux, the person who runs Radiator Comics, and what sort of process we ended up going through in order to bring from webcomic to print. And also I'm going to do like a sort of rapid fire timeline of the comic from when I started working on it in 2015 to present. So print prep, what did we really do though? Regular meetings. I work with editors Jamila Rouser and Steen Stewart. Hold for applause. Yes, 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 yes. To adapt my webcomic for print. We met on a monthly basis to assess what changes needed to be made. Lots of PDFs and notes. We shared files on Google Drive and would leave notes for each other for what to change or rework. Now, I watched Amanda Meadows' lecture from last week, and she was like, if you got something that's super secret, you probably don't want to use Google Drive. This was not super secret. This was medium secret, so it was okay. Mental health check-ins. Occasionally we would check in with each other to make sure we weren't overburdening one another or that the labor wasn't outpacing our expectations, which is important. Now, I don't assume that all teams will be able to do this, but like Amanda said, if you can meet with the other people who you're working with and be emotionally vulnerable with them, that is a huge boon to being able to get a project done in a way that you feel proud of in the end. Because you won't be afraid to say like, hey, I don't like this, or I don't like the way I'm being treated in meetings, or like these expectations are a bit much for what I've got going on in my life. And I just got I got lucky even though I also chose them with Neil, Jamila, and Steens because they're extremely upfront and straightforward people who are also willing to be like emotionally real with what's going on with them in real time. So find you a squad. Okay. Here we go. This is the development timeline breakdown, starting from 2015. So in 2015, 2016, I began work on because initially what I wanted to make was like a interactive, like video game experience, online video game experience that was like, even though it was structured like this sort of weird holomorphic event, it was going to just be depicting the mundane lives of me and my friends. But then the political climate changed substantially after the murder of Trayvon Martin, and I felt like I needed to move what it was that I was working on into a very explicit and like visually illustrative and forward-facing visual medium. In mid-2016, I failed to monetize my Patreon. I was impoverished and was living with my partner and their kid at the time. And they were like, when are you going to get your money up? Like, what's going on? And I was like, listen, I'm going to keep working on this comic and like eventually the Patreon is going to pay off and it's going to be like way better. But the difficulty is that like, if you're not working in the webcomic, if you're not working in the print comic space, not print comic space, but like if you're not interacted with comics community in a meaningful way, it's really difficult to drum up interest in your comic. And it's going to be difficult to get that feedback loop where you feel like you're doing it as a job rather than just as a hobby. In 2017, I put together an illustration portfolio at the behest of my manager, who's just a friend of mine who I meet up with weekly, who like helps me to self-regulate and figure out what sort of things I have going on with me. They do this gratis. Again, find yourself a squad. And I had an entomologist friend who worked at the Museum of Natural History who suggested I make a illustration series about a bunch of black kids, or like about black kids and bugs. And so this is what that ended up looking like. So this is my illustration collection, Arthropod, and I made it while I was working on I was like, I want to advance my artistic skills and be able to do better composition, and so I'm going to take some time to do some illustrations in addition to doing the comic. And eventually, in 2018, I applied to a bunch of art contests. 2 of them I got accepted into, or like, you know, it was a combination of cash prize plus being able to show your work at a gallery space. So there was one in Gaithersburg, which is the town that I was born in. It's not really significant, but it's dope that I got to show art in my birth city. And then in New York City, there was like a big, art party where they showed off all of the prints. And like this helped me to understand materially what it meant to be able to establish relationships in real space and like real meat space. The person who I stayed with up in New York City was the person who, at the bottom you'll see, ended up publishing the art book version of Arthropod that would result in Jamila Rouser like finding out about me in the first place. So, but like a tangential thing that happened is that Ronald Wimberly, who is the author of Prince of Cats, which is an awesome comic out by Image Comics, originally printed at Dark Horse, that is a retelling of the story of Tybalt from Romeo and Juliet, but it takes place in 80s New York City, where it's got a mostly black cast, and they all have katanas instead of rapiers. It's really dope. Highly recommend it. But he came to town to talk about the, it was called Lab Issue 1, but it was actually the second issue of his quarterly, what do you call it? I can't remember, what's the thing when you print something? It's called not a magazine, it's a periodical. It's a periodical. At Phantom Comics, which is in DC, which is where the city that I grew up in. And so I decided to go to this panel discussion about him releasing his periodical. And I showed up because it felt important, and then I ended up asking questions during the question and answer session, and he thought that my questions were really important. And like basically, I just like went there and behaved relatively normally, and like ended up cultivating a friendship with this person that now Ron is like my comics uncle. Like whenever I have an issue in the industry or like with other people who occupy the comic space, I hit him up first because he's the person who's been in the game the longest. Also, like I said, Jamila picked up a copy of Arthropod, and I, like, okay, Margarita, the person who runs 350 Collective, sent me this photo, and that photo sat on my phone for 6 months before I actually got to interact with Jamila. So in SPX 2019, I like ran into Jamila on the floor, recognized her face, like didn't know where from. And then we ended up like hanging out later, like just in a group, and had like a really good conversation. And then when I got home, I was like, wait a second, was that Jamila Rouser? Oh my God. And like hit her up on social media and was like, hey, like it was so nice to meet you at SPX. Like it would be so dope to like work together at some point in the future. And she was like, oh my God, you're the person who did Arthropod? Yeah, I love your work, da 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 da. And so like we were able to establish that connection rather than virtually because of that sort of appended additional like meat space interaction. And so in 2020, Volume 1 was complete. All during this previous time, I was like releasing the comic like relatively infrequently. I have like chronic depression, so sometimes like I'll miss a few weeks, but like I was like getting stuff out, and eventually in December 2020, I finished Volume 1 and started work on Volume 2. Then Jamila contacted me and said that she was working on a project with Radiator Comics, the one that I mentioned before, Real Realm, and we ended up. I ended up interacting with Neil, the person who runs Radiator, and like developed a much stronger rapport with Jamila to the point that I feel like we're friends. And that was a dynamic that I hadn't cultivated up until that point because I've been working in isolation just on my webcomic for all that time. And so now, like forging actual work relationships and friendships within the space was also an additional pivotal big thing for me. Remember I was like talking about if your goals are social, if your idea of success is social, this is when I realized that there was a social component to my success. This is the cover of Real Realm. Like I said, if you want a copy, I'll see what I can do. I ended up hanging out with Neil at SPX 2022 after the release of Real Realm. We had a really good conversation about disability and special interests. And he told me that he read and hated it. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, I just want to hold it in my hands. Like the art's so beautiful. And I was like, okay, that was the most backward compliment I've ever gotten. But so Radiator got in touch with me in February 2023. Neil finished volume one and offered to print it. He basically was like, um, I finished reading the comic. Do you have any plans to self-publish? Because if not, it would be an honor to publish this at Radiator. And I was like, I am living in poverty. I don't have a lot of prospects. This sounds super dope. And so that was when we first forged that plan. And then Jamila has chronic illness, a litany of different symptoms. And so I knew going in that I wanted her to be my editor, but I also wanted there to be someone to supplement for if and when she couldn't perform as well as she'd like to. And so that was when I had the idea of it would be really dope to have another Black non-binary person who's working on this comic, because the main character of the comic is non-binary. And I looked throughout the indie comics space to find a person who fit that description, and there were very, very, very few people. I think there were like four of y'all in total. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna get in contact with the folks who I see as like a really good fit for this project. And I also specifically wanted somebody who had a lot of industry know-how because of how much understanding I developed about how important it is to understand what's going on in the industry. And Steens fit that bill perfectly. And so I got in contact with them, and it turned out that they were already in the process of working on a project with Jamila at that moment. And so they were like, yeah, I know Jamila. I'd love to work with her again. I was like, oh, awesome. This is so cool. So everything like came together. It really I love when a plan comes together. So editing began in June of 2023. It was a really difficult start. But a lot of the concepts in if you read the original version of the webcomic that's still up on Tapas, it's very esoteric. There's not a lot of dialogue. It's difficult for lay people to understand, and even people who are already familiar with all the alchemical and esoteric symbolism that's going on, it's also difficult for them to understand. So it was really difficult figuring out how to bridge the gap between like all the metaphysical and weird ideas that were going on in my mind, and that were juxtaposed against this like very mundane story, and like reaching the audience and being able to communicate to them that this is like an interesting holographic experience. Riff for a bit about the year-long editing process. Man, that was a time. There was a time, and that time was the year 2023. It was a really interesting and transformative, and like honestly, it felt like a kind of birth, right? And the comic itself is about a character who is an apprentice midwife, and in following interviews, when they were like, so what was the process like of bringing this to print? I'm like, it's my baby. Like, earnestly, we put a lot of energy into like redoing a lot of the art. Steens can tell you we added a lot of new pages in order to like help transition between the segments that were like sort of like a hard start, like a hard cut in the original webcomic. And now the art object itself that I'm holding in my hands is like, it's one of the things that I'm the most proud of in my entire life. And so like, it's so amazing to have arrived on the other side of that tribulation. So the pre-order campaign began in March 2024. We decided to go with crowdfunder for a long story, but it also has to do with like interacting with people in meet space and in virtual space, and sort of understanding how the different like political and business dynamics work. But so we ended up going with crowdfunder, and it was really interesting. It started out like we hit like $3,000 or $4,000 within the first couple of weeks, and it was a $10,000 Kickstarter to print 1,000 copies. And by the end, 2 days before, we were at like $8,000, and I was like, we're not going to make it. We're not going to make it. But then we ended up squeezing through, and it was a success. So that is another thing to be aware of, is that like if you decide to go with the crowdfunding route in order to bring your comic to print, it can be nerve-wracking, nail-biting. It can put you back in therapy if you weren't already in it, or if you had already graduated. So the books arrived in August 2024. The print of the books actually turned out a little bit too dark. like darker than I would have liked. The sample printing that we had, which was done by a different printer just to see what if the texture and weight of the book would be good, came out perfectly. And I was just like, oh, it's gonna be perfect. Then we get the books back from the printer that's overseas, and it's just a little bit too dark. But we've already printed 1,015 copies. Nothing you can do about it at that point. So like the reason why we did that was because we had a timeline that we needed to meet in order to be able to have the book ready for SPX, which is the local my local small press expo, which is in North Bethesda in Maryland. That's like my like local expo, and so I really wanted to have it ready for SPX 2024 in order to expedite that process. I was just like, fuck it, like just get them over here, and we suffered the consequences. That's something that if you have a timeline for how you want to get things done, I recommend giving yourself like a good 2 month buffer to figure out whether or not the printing is going to come out the way that you'd like it to. There was a release party at Phantom Comics, which I mentioned before because that's where I met Ronald Wimberly. I was absolutely dissociated. I did a web comic reading that people were like, that was so good. I don't remember giving it. I don't remember doing it. But one of the standout things that happened was that, like, while I was sitting there signing books, I didn't know that this person was there, but Ron came up from the crowd and was like, "Hey, can you sign my book, please?" And I was like, "Oh my God, this is full circle." Because back in 2018, like, and he said it out loud. He like said it explicitly. Last time we were in this place together, like I was sitting where you are, and you were standing where I am, and I was like, "Wow." This is really so. These are the kinds of experiences that deciding to bring this kind of project into fruition can enable. It's not guaranteed to happen for you, but like these are the things that stand out in my memory. Rather than just being like, yeah, I've got 1,000 books in the world. Hell yeah! It's more about the interpersonal interactions that I've had around the event of bringing this thing into meat space. To date, we've sold about half of our inventory. There are 670 out of 10,015 copies out in the world. And there's statistically no way I'm going to win that Eisner because we're up against Lackadaisy. But I'm still proud of the nomination. I'm still going to put it on every single edition of the book going forward. Anyway, in conclusion, hurry up so we can get to the Q&A. Printing a comic is a mixed bag. I haven't published a new chapter of since October 2023. It can be extremely strenuous on your executive function. I recommend doing exactly what brings you the most joy. Try to minimize your strife by taking notes and anticipating likely outcomes. Good luck. And thank you. Please follow me on social media. As you can see, I'm at BTRCP with some variation on most platforms. And also, please check out You can find Volume 1 here at Betty's Books, or if they're sold out, check out radiatorcomics.com, comic.org, or tapas.io/series/comic/info. You can just take a photo of the QR code. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Woo! Okay,
Oh, I
great.
got it. Let me end it.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can stop sharing your screen if you want.
Yeah.
All right, so that was great. Everybody get some goodness out of it. You like that one? Okay, great, excellent, good to hear.
Okay. I'm glad too. I was very nervous.
Yeah, you didn't need to be nervous. You had so much to say. Yeah. Okay, so let's get to the Q&A. One of the first things I would like for you to do is could you show the book again, the very first one that you
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, because you're showing it off, and I thought it'd be really cool to see the difference.
Yeah. So this is like the character sheet that I did for the main characters who appear in the prologue chapter of and it contains the what would eventually become the first chapter. It's actually in the same sequence too. The prologue and one of another supplementary chapter that I ended up moving over to volume 2. Um, uh, but yeah, I had a pretty clear vision of what size and dimensions I wanted the book to be very, very early on. I was like, this is going to be it.
That's great. Okay. I've got some great questions for Buttercup, but also I'm going to be taking some questions from the audience. So as we're having our conversation, think of some good questions. Any question is a good question, by the way.
True. Any question?
Okay, first things first. I'm so glad you brought up angelic layers because I think about this manga all the time. It was like one
Yes.
of my first mangas that I was fully obsessed with. And like everyone else was obsessed with Chobits, and I was like, you don't even know.
Chocolates. You don't know.
Yeah, you don't even know. So yeah,
100%.
same, big same on there, same hat.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got some questions for you. First thing, I love your idea of narratizing luck. You know, luck is such a huge part of the comics industry. And I think it also takes timing, it takes opportunity. So can you tell us about a time where luck came into play in your professional career? I know so many people think they can set up what they see for themselves in the end, but you never know what it's just sheer luck.
Yeah. I mentioned running into Neil Bordeaux at SPX 2022. And in reality, it's not only that I ran into him because like the SPX has parties and like all the people, all the comics girlies are like hanging out and stuff. But I ran into Neil because my key card for my hotel broke. And so I went down to the front desk and he was walking into the hotel as I was walking out of the elevator, and that was the first time that we'd ever seen each other in like meet space before. And so like that was like if that hadn't been forged at that moment, I got his phone number and like we were like, let's hang out later. You're like, yeah. If that hadn't happened at that moment, I don't know that the rest of the trajectory would have happened. Like we had already worked together, but there was no guarantee that he would have been like, oh, I want to be friends with this person, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I talk about how I had always wanted to do an Encyclopedia Brown comic because
Mm-hmm.
I loved that book growing up.
Uh-huh.
And I would always put it off because I'm too busy. You know, I just don't have time to be making fan comics anymore.
Right.
And then I got laid off, which is
Uh,
never something that you expect.
right.
But because of that, I ended up with way more time to work on the Encyclopedia Brown comic, which I took to SPX, which an editor saw, and that editor reached out to me and was like, "Hey, you took an established character and like made it new. Can you do the
Mm-hmm.
same for this comic?"
Wow. 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 Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
So luck really is a huge part of it, but you also have
Mm-hmm.
to like put yourself in the situation to have a good opportunity, a good outcome, you
Right.
know?
Precisely.
Okay, cool. You had printed that first version of out. And you also said that you use Kablam as
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
well.
Yeah.
So which do you think is something that you prefer? Would you prefer printing with an online source like Kablam, or would you prefer working in like brick and mortar stores?
Honestly, I would say not. This isn't necessarily a recommendation, but it's like in my mind, you got to go with what's available to you. I definitely looked up a lot of local printers and was trying to find out like whether or not they'd be interested in the book. And some of them were like, "We don't print those kinds of things," or like, "We do like hardcover book like textbooks. We don't do comics." And so like after like shopping around, I recommend shopping around and talking to other people who work in the comics industry to find out what experiences they've had with different printers. Because like I said, Neil has like a personal relationship with the person who runs or like one of the representatives for Print Ninja, and so that means that like he's gonna like default to working with them repeatedly. But like if there was a really good brick and mortar printing shop, maybe he even does work with one down in Miami to like print his smaller projects. But like if you got to do something that's big, it's got a lot of copies, you got to find the place that has the capacity to be able to supplement that kind of thing.
Yeah. So that's a really great advice to shop around.
Mhm.
Um, was a series that was 8 years plus in the making.
Almost 10 now.
Yeah. Do you prefer to work on long form comics or do you have any interest in short form as well? And if you have done shorter ones, which ones were they?
Yeah, I do love short form comics. I am going to reveal here, but not actually say the name, that I'm going to be appearing in a very popular anthology sometime later this year. And I do like doing short form things. I think that I have a friend who also has this problem that like I have a hard time reining myself in that close. I'm more inclined to write a full blown novel than to write a short story.
Yeah.
And like even when I was working in like literary spaces, I had to like force myself to like confine myself to a specific length. And I find it more difficult to write short form because the way that my brain works, it starts connecting dots and it never stops, right? And so I'm just like working and working and building and building. But like I also think that there is a lot of not even just prestige, but like discipline in being able to say, I'm going to tell this very short, succinct story. And like, it's a good, what do you call it, like experience building practice to be able to write a vignette, because then you get a good idea about how to pace the chapters in your story. So like an interesting thing about webcomics, I think, is that because you're not working in massive graphic novel size chunks, each chapter kind of feels like you're doing a mini comic.
Yeah. Yeah, I when we first started working on this project together, one of the things I'm going to bring this up, I think it's really funny, is
No, yeah.
anytime we would have like a question about like world building or context, a lot of the times the answer was, "Oh, well, I bring that up in book four."
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
We have to be like, we want people to continue to
Right.
get to book four, you know?
No, like literally, I think the first one that you mentioned, you were like, "Why can't we do this?" And I was like, "Well, because that reveal doesn't happen until book 8." And you're like, "Book 8? Like, no, we gotta tell. We got the audience needs to know." I was like, "Okay, yeah, you're
So,
right."
and I know like the kind of editor that I am an unstoppable force, but I do believe that you are an immovable object, which is
Mhm.
a good thing. It's a good thing. I like working with creators who are not afraid to push back on questions, on edits, on thoughts. It's because it shows that you have your idea and it is solid and you really want to push for that.
Yeah,
Will
I think I just wanted to say I pointed out that in my stat block, right, my follow through is like at
yeah.
like 8. Yeah, I got an 8 plus 8 to follow through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, like, where do you get that courage, though, to speak up for yourself? You know, it can be very easy to be, steamrolled over in this industry. Not that I'm a steamroller. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
how do you get that vibe
Well,
to do that?
I think it's a combination of it's a little bit nature, a little bit nurture, and like to be completely honest, going into therapy when you find that you're having too much of a dysphoric experience. I'll be honest, Steens, you put me back in therapy. I'll be direct,
Yeah, but your
specifically honest
book
with
is
you.
Eisner nominated. So,
Yeah, no, you're right. You were right. No, listen, I also needed to be back in therapy because here's what ended up happening was that like Steens was doing their like unstoppable force situation, and I was sitting there in my immovable objectness, and I was like, I'm used to just standing my ground. What I need to do is establish better boundaries, and that's what I worked on in therapy. And I graduated from therapy, but apparently I'm not as good at establishing boundaries as I thought I was. So so it actually like helped to advance and like put me in a better position in terms of my mental health in the rest of my life because of the rigor of working on this project. But like, yeah, finding that confidence though. Okay, I tell people, I think I've mentioned in other interviews that like there was a breaking point. I had already signed back up for therapy. Then there was some issue that we were having in the publishing process or the editing process, and I had just sort of like broken. I'd gone into like fawn mode. I was just like, I'm just going to do whatever Jamila and Steen say to do. And it was at that meeting that you started the meeting by being like, okay, Buttercup, I've put all of the things that I need to do that I think that you should do on the table. What do you want to do? And it was the first, like, we just synergized in that moment. Do you know what I mean? And like, that's a really, that you can't really, like, there's no way to explain that feeling except for to experience it. You know what I mean? And like, I think that it's extremely rewarding and it's like, long-term like friendship and relationship forming to be able to have those experiences with people. And like, you don't always get that if you're just working like a corporate sort of gig in the same milieu.
yeah. Also, webcomics can be a kind of a solitary and isolating
Truly.
job,
Yeah, first 5 years of my webcomic for sure for those.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. You don't really have anyone over you telling you what needs to be done and by when. So
Mhm.
you become your own boss. So, when you started working collaboratively, specifically with Jamila, how was that process of getting into working with someone else when you're so used to working alone?
Well, I got extremely lucky and like had my first other like comic industry experience with one of the greatest writers of our era. So like I feel like not everyone's gonna get that, you know. But Jamila has a very meticulous process. She's talked about it a lot in interviews where she like plans out everything, everything, and then she hands you this gigantic document and then says, "Do whatever you want with this." And like it's so rare to have a person who has that kind of approach. So like I guess for writers out there who are planning to collaborate with artists, please like be willing to like lay everything out on the table and then give it over to the person who you're collaborating with, because it's an invaluable boon to give somebody who like is like either new to the process or like is accustomed to people micromanaging every single tiny thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
it was great though. I had a great time. I love Jamila.
no, that's really great advice. When I work with Ivy, Ivy Noel Weir, who's going to be teaching our script writing course later this year,
Wow.
they kind of just leave it up to me to do a lot of the decision making. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like working with her is,
Right,
you have agency, and so many times writers see, artists as the person who's going to illustrate their work, and that's not the case.
right.
So that's very cool. Okay, let's talk about this Eisner. You've been nominated. Do you feel differently about the book now that you know that people are looking at it and giving it accolades? Do you feel any different now that you have this nomination?
Well, my initial feeling, earnestly, was shocked because for anybody who doesn't know, the Eisners are the comics equivalent of the Oscars, right? Like it's like if you released like made an indie movie and like it was immediately up for like best. I don't know. It's astonishing to me, and initially it was, and I had to reflect for a bit. I remember like telling my partner about it, and then like just taking the book and holding it in my hands and going like, "Is this like actually worthy of that kind of attention?" And sat down and did a reread of the book, and like I was already like 10 or 15 pages in when I was like, "No, it's that fucking good. Like I'm just good." Like, I don't know what to tell anybody. Like, you know what? Sure, give me an award. I don't mind. Yeah.
Also, like when you're so steeped in the process,
Right.
you really only see the things that you still want to fix
Right.
rather than the goodness that is the whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I hope that you do feel really proud about the work that you've
Yeah,
done.
and in no small part, thanks to you and Jamila, the suggestions that you made for the print version of the book, which include like for those who have copies of it, the opening text scrawl that explains the like historical events, and then like in the midway through the comic, there is a graphic that shows how the magic system works, and like those would not be there if it weren't for Steens' advisement, and like it enhances the book significantly. So like yeah, I'm proud of the book and I'm proud of what we made together.
Yeah, yeah. It was a group effort. It was a team lift, as I
Mm-hmm.
feel would
True.
say. Um, okay, you were talking about your strengths and weaknesses. I love that stat block. It is very good. How did you figure out what those strengths and weaknesses are? Because for some people, they need to hear it from someone else. Hey, you're good at this. Is it the same way for you, or just have you had a lot of time to really process your own self to know what your strengths and weaknesses are?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I'm just an extremely introspective person. I think that is a good reflection of that too. That like, I can't just tell a story that's like a a drama that's about two people, or I can't just make a novel length bottle episode. Everything's got to be everything everywhere all at once.
Mm.
Awesome movie, by the way. Check it out. Uh, um, what was the question again? Yeah, no, um, I think that having earnest self talks is really important, and I don't expect everybody to have the neurotype to be able to do this, and so it's like, and other people have like rejection sensitivity issues and delusions of grandeur, which I also suffer from. So it's not like it's the easiest thing in the world. But like having earnest conversations with people who you feel comfortable being vulnerable with and asking them like, what do you think? What places? Where do you think I could grow? And like, would you be willing to help me grow in that space? Right? Is a valuable type of relationship to build, especially when it comes to doing something that has to do with craft and discipline. Because like, yeah, I know a lot of people who like are like always tooting their own horn, and I'm like, I don't really fuck with this art. Or like people who like are saying like this is the something of the ages, and like I read through it and I'm like, I don't know, mediocre cartoonist. That's a reference to something else, not a thing that I've actually said to a person in Meat Space. Okay, just FYI.
If you want to know more about mediocre cartoonists, come to me after class.
Uh,
So, when I am selling the book, because that's the thing that you can do as an editor, any book that you work on, you too can take it with you to a convention and make money off of it. It's great. I love making money off of your book, by the
thank you.
way. No, seriously, this book sells out first,
Yeah.
which is,
Wow.
a hit to my ego, but no, I love selling it. But one of the blurbs that I pretty much say when I get people to buy it is that it's like a magical girl inspired comic with Afro-futuristic and queer leanings. And that's kind of where I end it. And everyone is like, that's enough, I'll buy it.
Yeah.
How do you describe this book?
Yeah, I mean, I have like a canned response that's like, or not a can, what do you call it? Like pitch.
Elevator pitch. Yes.
Elevator pitch. Yeah, it's like it's a story about Eugene and a dark-skinned black non-binary aspiring birth worker, and now changed to like apprentice midwife, who finds out that they are caught between a cosmic conflict between the powers that be, aka the Illuminati, and a group of cosmic shamanic midwives who help bring deities into the world and then usher them back out into the ether. And like that's the procedural explanation that I try to give people. Yeah, it's too many words though. I like yours better, honestly.
It's a lot of words. I mean, definitely anytime anyone says, can you tell me more about that? I'll say no.
Yes. Do you see this beautiful book?
Just read it,
Yeah.
So besides working on and selling your work and gracing us with your presence here at Comics University, how else do you make a living? There are a lot of creators out there who do a little bit of everything, myself included. So what kind of things do you do to keep things going as a professional comic artist?
Yeah. Well, for the past 5 years, I've been living with my partner, who has been like doing the brunt of the work, or like they're the what do they wear the pants in the relationship. They're the breadwinner, and so like that has freed me up. I mean, obviously that like if you can find you a person who will allow you to do gig work, right? Because like if they understand that you're doing something that's passionate or based on your personal passions, or is politically important and relevant, then they'll be willing to supplement what things like you might not be able to do financially. Now, to answer the question directly, though, I set up a Patreon back in 2015, 16, and it has not gotten a lot of growth over time. I try to advertise it as much as possible, but it's for whatever reason, it hasn't stuck for people. Now I do make somewhere around $400 a month there, so like it is definitely there and helpful, but it's just the one thing that's kind of steady and ongoing. Since has come out, like other people have commissioned me to do mini comics. Like I said, like I'm going to be appearing in an anthology later this year, and that's like a paying gig in terms of royalties. And also, I work as an animator, so it's difficult for me to like say what other things you can do for comics. I guess earnestly, I mentioned that I had that job with the like big publisher, and like that was a pretty solid and sure thing, and they got in touch with me for that project. And so I bet if I had like reached out and been like, hey, I worked with these people, but like because of the pandemic and 75% of the industry falling apart suddenly, like I need work, then I would have been able to get more work. But I really wanted to focus on finishing up and like and pushing that forward. So now I work as a professional animator. Like I just got a big project that has been rolling out over the course of the past few months, and like I'm going to be finished with sometime in April. And so like that's like the thing that is actually helping me to stay alive is that like the person who the client was able to get a government subsidy to be able to pay all of us for this big project, and so like I'm taking a third of that money to do all the marketing and stuff like that. And so like that's cool and fun and a thing that is actually helping to subsidize my life. I don't know what I would do in comics besides the thing that I was just talking about, which is basically just apply for jobs.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, that's just the comics industry as a whole. You know,
mhm.
everyone's doing multiples of things. You know, I teach, but I also do the comic strip and I also go to class visits and I go to conventions. So
Right.
it's like you kind of have to do a little bit of everything to make ends meet. But
Jackies
you
of
do
all
a lot.
trades. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I really like
Mhm.
that. Jack of all trades. Um, so you know, you have your streaming, you got your Patreon, you got your comics work, you got your animation. Do you find time for hobbies? What do you do in your spare time?
I play video games all the
Say,
time. Video
great.
games all the time. I have 300 hours in the new Hades game, 1,000 hours in the one before that, 1,000 hours in Elden Ring. I've already got 90 hours in the new Elden Ring game that just came out last month. Um, yeah, I play a lot of video games. It's the like the best thing for me in terms of self-regulatory let's call it attention diffusion, right? To be able to that's also inspiring, right? Because like I know cognitively when I'm playing the video games that like people worked on these things and are also doing creative works and creative storytelling in those processes. So like I end up like getting the same thing as stimming, which is a good thing for me as an autistic person. But then like the storytelling that I would get from binging a TV show or watching movies, and also like the creative input of being like, wow, this landscape is so beautiful. How would I capture this in a panel? And so like I'm getting fed while I'm also self-regulating, which I think is like just the best thing for me.
That's great. I'm really glad that you had an answer for that. I would be very upset if you had no hobbies.
Mm.
Okay. Well, those are all the questions that I have. So now I'm going to put it to the students. Any questions from our students? Yes.
Um, so this is more about like the initial webcomic than the printing aspect, but when you were initially working on the webcomic, did you ever like kind of bog yourself down in your own thought process? Like, you kind of slowed your own self down because you were, I don't know, thinking about something too hard instead of actually just doing it. And if you ever did encounter that, how did you work through it?
Yeah, absolutely. I am an overthinker. I am the overthinkingest girly of all time. I started working on what would eventually become in 2013 and didn't start work on the comic until 2015 and didn't start releasing the comic until 2016, right? So it is a constant struggle for me. The thing that helped break that chain for me, or the like overthinking, putting all these different charts together, mapping out all this other stuff, was I don't know these characters, even though I think I know these characters. I need to see what they actually do in space if I put them on the page. And so I was like, I'm going to do a 6-page mini comic introducing the characters. And that ended up becoming the first chapter of the book that you read. Like that 6-page mini comic at the beginning was just the thing that I did to break my my like what do you call it? It's like choice paralysis. Like the thing that I used to break my choice paralysis is now canon. That's the answer to that question. If that makes any sense. But like just getting like taking the time to be like, I'm gonna make a the shortest form version of the thing just to show myself what the thing is that I'm making. And if you're somewhere else in the process and having a hard time like overthinking a specific chapter, a specific story segment, what I recommend doing is maybe take a look at something else that's going on in the same part of the world, but somewhere else, right? Like a thing that I often do as a storytelling vehicle is contextualize what's going on with the story by talking about something that happened in the past, by talking about something that's happening elsewhere in the world. And so being like, hey, what are these characters doing while these other characters are doing something else can help give you ideas about how their interrelation will result in something that happens later on.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
This is kind of a two-parter. The second part of the question, she just slightly continued the first part. When you were making the webcomic, did you know that you wanted, like, and forgive me if you've already mentioned this, did you know that you wanted to make it into a comic?
Okay, so I have like a split answer on this because early on in the presentation, I was like, hey, if you operate in the webcomic space, you might be okay with it just permanently being online. And that is the thing that I am like internally comfortable with. But I also was like, but what if I want it to come to print at some point? And so I planned for both, if that makes any sense. Like, I was like, how do I want it to look on the screen and how do I want it to look on the page? So I didn't know that I wanted it to be in print, but I knew that planning for it would ease the process in the future. And that turned out to be 100% true.
Okay, the follow-up to this is that like what are some of the things you did to try and prepare for this like dual film? And what are some things where it's like after you started, working on the print, like, I wish I did this in the comic?
Oh, I mean, the answer to that directly is that because you're scrolling for the webcomic, there's a lot of paneling that I did that what took scrolling into account, but not the page turning. And so there was multiple times where Steens was like, we need to rearrange all these panels. And I'm like, rearrange the panel? And like that was a challenge, but it was a fun challenge at the end of the day. But one of the main things that I took into account was, like I said, I know what kinds of books I like to hold in my hands. And so I planned for the webcomic to be in a format that I could print it at B6 size, which is what this page size is, which is the same thing that is like the standardized size for Japanese tankobon, both comics and light novels. So like if you want to, if you have like some sort of ambient inkling that you might want to print, like thinking about what kinds of books you like and would like to hold in your hands is the best thing, in my opinion, for how to figure out what it is that you need to do to make sure that the webcomic fits into that criteria. And just a little bit of research, honestly. Like I was like, I like tankobon. I know that all those Nana books that I had like are my favorite things that are like little time capsules to hold. Like what was the size of that book? I just took the book, measured it, looked up online, and they were like, that's B6. And I was like, I know what size my book is.
Right.
I know what dimensions my pages are too.
And that's very helpful for if you were thinking of pitching your comic to a publisher as well. Having an idea of what the finished product will look like is going to help them figure out their P&L, which we learned last class, their profit and loss sheet. It's going to show them exactly how much they'll be able to spend on the book, depending on what you want, and how much then they'd be able to pay you based on that. So it's always good to have some kind of idea of what if. Great question. We got a question from YouTube. So
what?
Cool.
Whoa.
I know. Dandy McDowell was surprised.
Oh my God.
Was surprised to learn a few years ago that you had a person that you met with frequently to ensure that things were progressing. How would you say that affects or has affected your work ethic or your ability to continue?
Well, for full disclosure, Dandy's my sibling.
Let's
yeah. and we've had this conversation before, but it is a good question and like something that I think more people should know about is that like back in 2000, I think it was 2013, I realized how bad my executive function was back when I was like writing novels. I was like, I need a person who I can just like talk to occasionally about what's going on because I'm so like ADHD scatterbrain that like I will never return to home base if I don't have a person who does a little bit of that regulation with me. And so my manager, Grace Marston, who I love dearly, is a person who since 2013, so for 12 years now, we meet every single week and she's like, what do you got on your plate? What do you need to do this week? Are you going to Pride? Like we need to like just a person who just like checks in and makes sure that I'm doing self-regulation. And she also works in a professional capacity. She's a curator at the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, and like so she knows a lot about art, a lot about art history, and so whenever I bring something up, she's like, "Oh yeah, I already know about all those things, and can piece things together and be like, okay, well here's what we need to do." It's really invaluable to have a friend who's willing to do that kind of thing. I don't know, like it's hard to even make a suggestion about like how to navigate that because every single year I tell her, "I don't worry, I'll pay you eventually," and I just like I never have the money to be able to do that, but she keeps being willing to. So get you a Grace, but I don't know. It's a miracle.
I mean, there's definitely like some people who just have that about them. I think I'm one of those people. With
Right.
When I was in college, my roommate had just as bad of a problem with executive functioning. And I happen to be great at execution. And so, like, I see no reason why I can't just check in on you and be like, have you done your homework?
Right.
What is the homework? You
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, there are people out there. We do exist. There are dozens of us. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay. You've mentioned it a little bit. How do you make your comic making process disability or like neurodivergent friendly?
Did you hear that?
How do you make your comics process disability or neurodivergent friendly? I am a big choose like pick your battles girly. I would love for all things to be all inclusive, but like a thing that I really struggle with is doing like the alternative text on social media to help people who are vision impaired. So like that's a place where I'm always going to fail. And like, if someone wants to pick up the slack at some point in the future, I'm happy to pay them to do that. Like, are you talking about the process specifically or the book itself?
Yeah, so how do you make it like adapted for your best workflow?
Okay. I try to incentivize myself to do the thing that causes me the most joy. And the thing that feels the most like stimming and self-regulatory to me. I showed you I showed y'all a bunch of the early comics that I was exposed to, and those were formative things in my brain that established what I think is cool and fun. And so I go back to those things and try to emulate them when I am feeling down or under motivated or understimulated. I'll be like, wow, like that cover that Andy Park did for Archangels the Saga is so cool. Let me just draw this, like let me just literally draw this like stroke for stroke. And then like sometimes, a comic that I absolutely love is Witch Hat Atelier, which also talks about disability and the creative process. And every single time I open up that book, it immediately makes me want to make another comic. Like immediately. So highly recommend finding things that help give you joy. Sparks joy.
Any other questions? Hmm?
Also, if that didn't fully answer your question, I'm also happy to hear a follow-up.
We got 2 thumbs up.
Okay, cool.
Any questions? Yes.
Do you have like a specific thing when you put through the print book that you're really, really proud of that you thought through?
Something about the print book that I'm really, really proud of. Honestly, the the gaps that were bridged by Steen's and Jamila's insistence on supplementing the lack of clear narrative cohesion. Because I was thinking about this as like a Quentin Tarantino movie where it's just like cutting to whatever it is that like feels the most interesting. And they were like you don't have any like chapter headers. You don't have any thing that sort of like helps to ease the reader through the process. We ended up doing, I think, between seven and like I think seven transitional pages that don't exist in the webcomic that are in the book now that operate as chapter headers. And like each of those brand new illustrations that I got to do at like peak skill after like finishing the majority of this art in 2020, like felt really good to do, to like go back into those old files and like do the like look at my old uh, palettes and color selection and stuff like that. I think the thing that I'm absolutely the most proud of though is that we went back and redrew whole cloth the opening mini comic called Supermoon Special, and like just to see the juxtaposition between like where I started back in 2015, 2016, and where I'm at artistically now, like that's real progress. It feels like after like 3 or 4 months at the gym, after going every single day and being like, wow, you know,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's always really nice to like go back and be able to see how you've grown as an artist.
right.
And redoing pages is something that happens all the time. You know, when you're doing a pitch, you'll do those sample pages. And then if you get that pitch picked up, they're going to have you redo those pages because they have to be done in the appropriate trim size. And then you might have to redo those pages again because the editor is like, actually, let's fix this. So being
Yeah.
able to actually see the visual growth can be really, really nice.
I do think the thing that Steens just said is like one of the few things that like I did not account for and like do not have as part of my practice is that like not first thought, best thought, but like once I've solidified something in my mind, like Steen said, like I'm an immovable object. And so like I'm just like, this is what it is. And like the reality is that no, iteration and editing are the end all be all to making something that you're actually happy with, proud of, and flows well.
And I can say that easily as an editor, but as a creator, I hate it.
Yeah, no, me too. Oh my gosh.
I don't like redoing things I've already done. I only have so much time in the day.
Yeah,
But it is worth it in the long run. It
Mm.
is. Any other questions? Anyone need any advice on anything, perhaps? Yes.
I'm passing the trend from a comic to a comic when it's edited. How do you feel like you have to like target and if you're like creating books or the story from like the web comic to the version or like what's discussing with characters?
Did you hear it? Would you like me to repeat?
No, the mic didn't pick that one up.
Okay, so basically, did you find something that you had to really bargain with when you went from webcomic to print that you had to like really kind of collaborate and maybe even compromise when it comes to storytelling when you finally got to work with editors? Because you know, when you started with the webcomic, you didn't have to worry about editorial feedback, you know, so.
Yeah, I don't know, Steens, did I?
I think you did pretty good with compromise.
Right.
I mean, the long and short of it is that the goal is for someone to read the book and understand what's happening in the book. It's pretty simple, you know? And so I think the underlying idea over all of our notes were not on what we liked or didn't like. It was more so just if you want them to understand it in the way that you want them to perceive it, then you have to be clear about that. So
Yes.
I think contextual clarity was the one thing that probably had to be worked on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I actually have an interesting answer to this because, I'm not going to spoil anything in the book, promise. But like, I consider this book fundamentally a mystery, and the kind of mystery stories that I enjoy are the kind where like you look through it and you're like, I don't really know what that was, and then it compels you to look through it again. And in looking through it again is when you get the details that you missed the first time. And so like that was the kind of story that I wanted to tell. And Steens and Jamila were like, some people are going to pick this book up, read it once through, and never touch it again. You still have to sell to those people. Like you still have to sell the book to those people. And I was like, that's true and fair. And they were like, rather than like making this the most a baby can understand it level of complexity, like what we want you to do is just string a thread that goes from the beginning of this part of the story to the end of this part of the story, and like just make it make sense for the people who are trying to follow along. And that was really difficult for me because I really wanted it to be this like puzzle where all the pieces are spread out and like thrown all across the universe. And then like it's not until you get to the final chapter, volume 8, where it all comes together and you go, ah. Now I have a new goal, which is figuring out how to simulate that feeling while still having the story be coherent, which is only a good thing. like, but it
It's
did, but
definitely
it did feel
fun.
like bargaining. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was probably the only thing that I was like, Buttercup's not going to change.
Yeah. No.
You know,
No.
there are definitely plenty of times where I was like, what other way can I get this across to them so they know I'm not trying to ruin their story? I just want the book to sell, you
Right.
know?
Right.
But it sucks that that is a
Mm.
part of the thought process when making a book is how do I get this book to sell? How do I get these numbers up? Because it is a really creative process to make work. But you also have to realize the business too, you
Yeah.
know?
You hear about this a lot in video games, right? Because not everybody is fully video game literate. A lot of times people want to make a game where it's just cold open, like the first Mario game where you just walk in, you have to figure out what the hell is going on. And the reality is in the modern era, like you have to put a tutorial at the beginning of your game or else you're going to have a player drop off of 90%, right?
Yeah.
And no one can afford to do that. You can't spend that much money on a product and have a 90% of people be completely disinterested in it.
Yeah.
So I understood, and like when I was able to narrativize it that way in my head, think about it like in terms of like a video game or even a puzzle game, like that, like you need to have an instruction booklet in order for people to be able to play. I was like, okay, 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 okay,
Yeah.
okay.
This is why you have hobbies.
Mm.
Hobbies can help you in a lot of ways.
Yes, yeah, 100%, 100%.
Well, that is brings our class to a close. So I really want to give you a big thanks for stopping by and talking to us about your process. It was really, really enlightening, and
Thank
I
you.
learned some new things as well. So thank you again for coming, and let's give a round of applause.
Thank you, and I hope everyone out there who gets a chance to enjoys Volume 1.
Yeah, look, these are
Hey
your
everyone!
peanuts.
Hey! Thank you for joining us.
So yes, if you want to pick up we have some here at Betty's Books, and we'll see you later. That's the end.
All right.
All right, I'll talk to you later, dude.
Okay, bye.
Bye.